Welcome back, everyone. My name is Mike Ivanov, and I'm a Canadian chess FIDE master. We're back for the third story in our chess story series, and today I want to tell you about the game between Jose Raul Capablanca from Cuba and Vera Menchik, who was the first ever female world champion. Some of you may have heard about Queen's Gambit, the show, like half of the world heard about it by now, and she was, you could say, the role model for Beth Harmon in that series because Vera did crush many male players and almost all the women of her time. Unfortunately, in this game, it seemed like she was a little bit scared of Jose Raul Capablanca and gave him too much respect and tried to trade off all the pieces. The previous games we looked at were ended by mate. There was some sort of attack, there was some sort of queen coming, there was some sort of hook pawn on h4 or h3, the nail pawn that helped to mate the white king. But today, that's not what we're going to see. Instead, we're going to see a series of trades, and every trade helps or hurts someone. And in this case, most of the trades will be in black's favor. Let's take a look. We start off with 95. After a normal opening where White Castle took out the pieces, did everything right, got the center, Vera decided that she didn't want this knight and was willing to trade him off. Perhaps she was hoping that the knight would take, the pawn would take, the knight has to run away, and then she can bring in her queen and have some fun at the light squares. But that wasn't going to happen. Rule number one of being a good chess player is always trade on your terms, says Jose. If the knight takes, then why did he waste all that time going to the middle if he's just going to trade off this guy who barely moved at all? Right? So he took a whole bus just to trade off for this useless knight on c6. That's a big waste of time, and the other pieces are not happy about it. After Jose took back, Vera tries to take out her queen, connect the rooks, get ready to take the center later on. And Jose doesn't mind, because if you play e4 right now, well, first of all, I can just take, and play something like e5. I want to lock up that bishop so he will never see the light of day, and he will wonder, why is there a pawn in the way? Why is there a pawn on e4 that's blocking his path? Okay, so in this case, Vera decided to trade off another piece. Maybe she wasn't a big fan of the bishop and wanted to push the pawn later. Maybe she thought she could get to this king, which is hard to believe, but she decided to trade off the bishop. After queen d7, we're once again trading on our terms. We say, I'm not gonna let you in. I'm not gonna just trade off the queen and let you give me a check. No, you're gonna trade what I want you to trade and where I want you to trade, so that after you take me, my queen is becoming a monster slowly but surely. Vera decided that with a chimney knight, nothing could go wrong, and perhaps knight could help the king, perhaps knight can get the center. What can be bad about that? Well, in the meantime, Jose castled, getting ready for those rook marches. After taking, Vera trades off another pawn. And even with pawn trades, somebody's happy and somebody's not. If you look at the white pawn right now, that's already getting the center. It's already doing something useful. As for this guy, not so much. He's blocking the bishop, and the only thing he's doing is supporting these pawns. Okay, this pawn is definitely better than d6, so why are we trading it? Every trade needs to have a reason. This one doesn't. Okay, after playing e4, the pawn becomes the target, and the knight is stuck protecting the pawn, and the bishop is stuck looking at the poor knight. Okay, after rook d8, suddenly there is a highway that's opened, and black is out to get it first. It feels like black is already white, doesn't it? Because black's already got the highway, black's already got all the pieces out, and white is struggling behind because they spent all that time trading the wrong pieces. So at this point, Vera tries to get some space, tries to get that knight out so he doesn't have to babysit the pawn for the rest of his life. But not so simple. After knight d5, knight f3. The knight is trying to help, but once again, the pawns are split. In chess, you want to have your pawns together. This guy ran ahead of his peers. All of his friends are saying, wait, wait for me, wait up, but it's too late. E5 has already gone to another country, and no one's there to help it except for the pieces who don't want to babysit. Now, what's the worst piece in Black's camp? Of course, the rook. If the rook is bad, let's make it better. After rook d7, we got the other rook on the horizon. We got the queen getting ready to fire, the knight getting ready to fire. All the pieces are starting to look nice. Can white ever kick me away? Sure, but you want to invite me to a better square? Even better. Vera says, how about I trade off more pieces? I already traded the bishop. Let's not stop there. Let's trade off all of them, and maybe I can get a draw against the world champion. Um, Trading pieces doesn't always get you a draw. And in this case, it actually made white suffer more in this position. Okay. After rook d8, suddenly the black rooks are dominating, not white's. White is still lagging behind, always a little behind because of all that wasted time trading. After bishop d2, white is trying to get back in the game so they can trade off more rooks, but at this point it's too late. We cover c4, now we're trying to make sure the bishop never comes out and fix all the pawns on the wrong color. At this point, the bishop has to stare at c3 and e5. Look at these pawns. Look how the bishop loves them so much. He just wants to stare at the wall forever and ever and eat rocks forever and ever. In the meantime, my bishop can bother it from here. One day he can bother these pawns, maybe from there. And we want to make sure these pawns stay as they are. They're frozen. Okay? Now, bishop f4. Not a bad move, trying to help a pawn and trying to trade more rooks. But we don't look at the pieces being traded. We look at the pieces left over. Compare these guys to their counterparts. Bishop, knight, queen, bishop, knight, queen. Black's queen is awesome, has scope, defense, and attacks. Black's knight is awesome, has pawns in his sight. He can smell the ice cream that the pawns have with them. And what about the bishop? Well, the bishop can see a future where one day he has a dream of eating all those poor pawns. And this bishop has no future. His future is to eat rocks once again. And so we keep going. H6, little window, that should help. Trade, trade, we trade off some rooks, and the queen invades. Because of the pieces left over, black is still better. The rooks didn't matter. What mattered were the pieces left over, and our pieces are still better than theirs. After bishop g3, we can invade, and we're not even coming for the pawn. And this is very instructive. We don't want to trade. I'm not going to give you my awesome pawn for your lousy sleeper pawn on a2. No, I actually want something else. If I went for here, it would just be a trade, and it would be a trade in their favor, because suddenly I have split pawns, and their pawns are best friends forever. So instead of that, how about I trade queens? The remaining pieces are still good for me. Nothing really changed. Perhaps your king is gonna be better, but my knight is 10 times better than yours. My knight can actually eat something. And that was the critical point in this game. Because of all these bad trades, Black's pieces were good enough to start eating pawns in the endgame, whereas these guys aren't eating anyone but themselves and their own army. So, even as the king tries to help, he's too late. We come and steal the pawn, and the rest of the game is just endgame technique. Just finishing with the extra pawn, which isn't a problem for a world champion. Even this knight trade only helps black because there are less pieces to worry about. Nowadays, I would have probably tried to keep the knight, try to put some pressure on these pawns, try to get the bishop out, maybe with f4. Not that it's easy, but at least we keep pieces on. So another rule to remember is don't trade pieces when you're down on ice cream, when you're down on points, which Vera didn't follow here. After trading one last night, watch how he freezes the pawn. He says, Pawn, stay. I like you where you are. The rock will be there for good, as I'll be hunting it and that guy will be biting on it. Poor bishop has to look at him for the rest of his life. Now, whereas my pawns are invincible, try to get them. Hey, bishop, come on, get me. Come on, get me. And anytime he tries to get me, I'll just go on light squares, which this pawn cannot do. Finally, we make a nice little pawn chain, make sure they can bully us with the bishop, and we can start bullying their pawns on the other hand. The king runs out, run, 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 finally gets to c6, finally kicks out the bishop, and finally gets ready for bishop c5. Now, this bishop is being annoying, and Vera is saying, oh, look at my king, it's so good, he can't touch me. But this is just a matter of time. He can't stay there forever. The bishop is barely moving at all, he's almost out of squares, and I still have the healthy passed pawn. It's not passed yet, but it will be soon. Very soon, the pawns will get moving, and then it'll definitely be passed. Okay, first we take out any squares the king may have, because the king is a good piece, the bishop's a good piece. The bishop has to stay here, and now the king has no squares to go to. They try to trade, they want us to trade, but we ask ourselves, and I want you to ask this question too, does the trade help me or them? After trading, our pawns are doubled, and they can try to run after them. Why? That doesn't help me. I'll just wait until they run out of moves. And it turns out that they don't have many. They don't have many moves at all. Finally, they decide to trade and give me a pass pawn. If they push some other pawns, it wouldn't have really helped. I can freeze this guy, for example. h4. Sorry, no squares left. And eventually you run out of moves. Okay. At this point, Vera just took and created a pass pawn for Jose, which would be a great gift for anyone. So Jose just has to trade off the only remaining bad guy, the bishop. First, he gets the pawns rolling, and the king has to try and chase after it. And finally, we get to trade off the last piece, which made Vera resign, because there is no stopping this guy, while at the same time keeping these guys safe. What trades went wrong for white? Almost every trade, starting with the bishop earlier on. The rooks were traded, which didn't really help white, right? The knight was traded when we were down a pawn, which made black's life easier. So all the trades were in black's favor, and he only traded on his terms. And I hope you can do the same in your games.